some people are simply structured for failure. I began looking inside of myself and asking myself this painful question: am I structured for failure? I have the incredible privilege of coaching and working with some of the top leaders in the world. And one of the things I find over and over and over again is that it's not failure that cripples them. It's not failure that moves them to a point of psychological turmoil. It's not failure that moves them towards self-destructive behavior, but success. It's the way to success. It's all the implications of breaking away from the status quo and elevating to a different level of what it means to be human. That becomes a heavy weight to bear. Good morning, it's so good to see you today. I have 15 minutes to convince you that there is untapped, latent, extraordinary genius within you that may never be actualized, that you may never be aware of. And yet, if you could just make simple, granular mind shifts, you'd begin to unlock that genius within you. When I began writing Mind Shift, that's coming out in just a few weeks, I always get this question in the process: how long did it take you to write this book? Most of the time, you don't know. You just pick the day you actually write the first word. But with Mind Shift, it's different. I know the exact moment the architecture of this book began. It was on October 26, 1990, where something erupted within my own brain that made me begin to ask the questions: am I creating internal limitations that are limiting me from living the life that I'm created to live, that I'm designed to live, that I'm capable of living? On October 26, 1990, driving through the streets of Dallas, Texas, I was listening to sports radio, and I heard a conversation about an event that happened the night before. And the event of October 25th was actually connected to an event 8 months earlier. Because on February 11th in Tokyo, Japan, Mike Tyson had a fight against a boxer named Buster Douglas. And in that fight, if you know very little about boxing, you know that Mike Tyson was most likely the most vicious, dangerous, notorious fighter that walked into the ring. And Buster Douglas was a 42-1 underdog. No one expected Buster to even survive the first or second round. But what happened in that moment shook the boxing world. Buster Douglas not only survived 10 rounds, but in the 10th round did what everyone perceived was impossible. He knocked Tyson to the ground and knocked him out and took away 3 heavyweight belts in that moment. So 8 months pass. Buster Douglas is finally going to defend his heavyweight title. You would think that he would spend those 8 months training, focused, refining, expanding his capacity. If he could beat Mike Tyson, he was unstoppable. He would be unbeatable. All he had to do was be more of the same or just incrementally improve who he was. But 8 months later, he shows up overweight, out of shape. I even heard a rumor that someone saw him in a McDonald's in a mall earlier that day. I don't know exactly what Buster did over those 8 months, but I know what he did not do. He did not prepare to defend his title. So stepping into the ring against Evander Holyfield in the Mirage, he gets knocked out in the 3rd round. I don't even know if he was knocked out. I think he just passed out from exhaustion. So then October 26th comes. I'm driving down the streets of Dallas. I'm listening to the sports radio, and I hear 3 men having a conversation about Buster. And one of them said, "Why do you think Buster didn't even try? It's one thing to lose. No one would ever hold it against him if he lost to another champion, but he didn't even try." And then another of the analysts said, "Well, Buster Douglas, from everything I know, is an incredibly good human being. He's even a deeply religious person. I think he's a Christian." And then the third person said this: "Some people are simply structured for failure. And when I heard that, it shook me from the inside out. Some people are simply structured for failure. And now the conversation inside of my head was no longer about Buster Douglas or Mike Tyson or Evander Holyfield or anyone else. I began looking inside of myself and asking myself this painful question: am I structured for failure? Have I allowed myself to build the architecture of an internal world that limits my capacity, that limits my potential, that creates a ceiling so low that I will never live to the full nature of my existence? Would I die with talent, genius, creativity, capacity, unspent, unused, and even unknown? I was 10 years old when I woke up late one night to get some water, and I snuck through the living room and I heard my mom and my stepdad having a conversation. They were talking about me. They were talking about how they needed to send me to some kind of psychiatric center. They had given up. They didn't know what else to do, so they were going to send me to a psychiatrist. And as I listened into that conversation at the age of 10, I panicked. And they saw me, and they were nervous that I was overhearing this conversation and said, "Hey, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy." And they were, "No, you don't have to go, you don't have to go." And then in that moment, I had my first moment of self-awareness. I realized when I was screaming, "I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy," that I looked absolutely crazy. So I stepped back, and they told me I didn't have to go. They're just trying to find me some help. And I said, "No, I want to go." I said, "Are you sure?" I said, "No, I want to go, because if I'm crazy, I want to know." But that's the dilemma. If you are crazy, you really never know. And I remember when some of the leaders at GSL said, "We might have an opportunity for you to interview Elon Musk." I got all excited. Elon Musk, that would be bucket list. And I told my wife, I might get a chance to interview Elon Musk. And my wife said, "Well, that sounds so exciting for you." And I said, "Yeah, but it's going to be a challenging interview because I perceive he's somewhat on the spectrum." And my beautiful wife, Kim, who's been married to me for 40 years, looked at me and she said, "Honey, you're going to be all right. Because you, my love, are also on the spectrum." Whatever the spectrum is, I was on the other side of the spectrum. I was a straight D student, 1st through 12th grade. I would go to school and disappear into an imaginary world, and I would come back to consciousness, and the whole class would be gone. The teachers literally would give up trying to get my attention. Every year, I would go with my book saying, "This is the year I'm going to make straight A's." And a week later, I couldn't remember where I left my books. So I always grew up with this constant reminder that I was structured for failure. I know it's not PC, but I was told I was retarded. I was told that I did not have the mental capacity for success. I was told I would never amount to anything. And I began losing my own sense of connection to reality. I remember running away from home over and over and over again, sleepwalking in the streets of El Salvador, where security would bring me back to our house. And I remember convincing myself that I was not a human, that I was from another planet. It was the only explanation I could find for feeling so disconnected and broken and empty and alone in the world. I would run away and go to open fields in the middle of the night and just scream to the stars and tell them, "This experiment is not working. I need you to come back and get me. We do not connect to the species of humans." It was such a disappointment later to discover I was one. Is it possible that your limitations are not external? They're not circumstantial. They're not environmental. That if you're struggling with limitations, if you're struggling with a low ceiling, that the people that you might be blaming, the the world you might be blaming, the environment or circumstance that you're blaming, or actually not to blame at all. In fact, I want to submit to you that there is absolutely no experience that you will ever go through, no matter how tragic or painful, that can create in you internal limitations. That there's nothing you've ever been through, nothing that you're going through, nothing that you will ever go through that can create in you internal limitations. That all limitations within you are created by you. Now, I know it's not popular to say that. It's so much easier to blame someone else. And believe me, I have an entourage of people and circumstances that I've blamed throughout my life. I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. That's enough. I'm from the most violent country in the world. I never knew my real father. My grandparents raised me in my developmental years. My mom came back when she could and brought us to the States. I had to learn a new language and work as an outsider. And it would be so easy to look back on my life and blame everything I'd been through and all the environments and circumstances I had to journey through to explain the limitations I've taken upon myself. But your internal limitations are not the product of what you've experienced. They're the product of your response to those experiences. And because of that, you have 100% of the capacity to destroy those structures for failure and replace them with structures for success. And as I looked more closely at Buster Douglas, I thought, well, they're almost right. See, I don't think Buster's struggle was that he was structured for failure in the way that we think. See, Buster had lost before. He had lost 4 fights before Evander Holyfield. In fact, he won 5 fights and then lost his 6th fight. Went to 20 and then lost another one. So he knew what it was like to lose. He knew what it was like to fail. And in fact, I'm going to suspect that for most of us in this conversation right now, your greatest challenge is not going to be overcoming the weight of failure. It is going to be overcoming the weight of success. What Buster Douglas was not structured to face was not failure, but success. I have the incredible privilege of coaching and working with some of the top leaders in the world. And one of the things I find over and over and over again is that it's not failure that cripples them. It's not failure that moves them to a point of psychological turmoil. It's not failure that moves them toward self-destructive behavior, but success. It's the way to success. It's all the implications of breaking away from the status quo and elevating to a different level of what it means to be human. That becomes a heavy weight to bear. Someone sent me a DM this morning that is consistent with so many that I've received in the past, asking me to not continually call people to extraordinary lives. In fact, on this particular conversation, I was being asked to recognize the beauty of an ordinary life. And as I listened to this conversation, I could feel it. I want to concur. It must be so nice to be happy with an ordinary life. But I don't know if that's a real or legitimate human experience. See, I'm convinced that there's genius that's intrinsically placed within you, that there is your own personal greatness